Have you ever had the strange feeling that you were being watched, even though you were completely alone? I did. And it wasn't in a busy city or anywhere where it could be considered normal. It happened to me in the middle of nowhere. I was driving along US Route 93 between Nevada and Arizona late at night, and the rain fell in an almost hypnotic rhythm on the windshield. My body ached. Sleep was slowly overcoming me, and the only thing I wanted was a cheap bed for the night. Nothing fancy, just a place with a roof and a mattress that wasn't made of cement. That's when I saw the sign, Red Pine Motel, vacancy, flashing red neon, one of the letters slightly missing, hanging from an old structure that was barely standing. The building had the look of abandonment, the kind you see in documentaries about unsolved crimes. But I wasn't in a position to choose. I parked the car right there. The reception was in an adjoining hut, with a dim yellow light coming from behind the dingy curtain. As soon as I stepped inside, I noticed something was off. It was silence, a dense, almost suffocating silence. There was no sound of TV, radio, or footsteps. Nothing, just the slow ticking of an antique clock hanging on the wooden wall. I stood there for a few seconds, until a man appeared from the end of the hallway. Tall, thin, grey-skinned, and with the most vacant eyes I'd ever seen. He didn't say goodnight. He didn't ask my name. He simply held out his hand with a key and a receipt. Room 8, 2 nights. That was all he said, and he disappeared into the same silence from which he had left. I grabbed the receipt and walked to the car, keys in hand. I didn't notice anything unusual about it until I was in my room. I was taking off my shirt when I saw that on the inside of the paper there was something handwritten. In shaky writing, with blue ink already a little patchy, there was the message that froze me inside. You have 2 nights. Don't look out the window. I stood there for a moment, staring at it. I thought about everything, a joke, some internal motel code or something, maybe some paranoia from whoever stayed there before me. But there was something about that sentence that didn't feel like a joke. It was a warning, an unspoken rule, as if I'd just accepted a contract I didn't even know existed. I confess, at that moment, I laughed. I felt a little ridiculous for letting a sentence written on old paper affect me so much. But the room only added to the discomfort. The walls were covered in greenish wallpaper, faded in spots. The bed creaked with every movement, and the window, it was the only thing that stood out from the rest. It had thick wooden shutters, secured from the inside with an iron latch, as if someone wanted to ensure they wouldn't be opened by mistake. You know when your instinct screams, but you ignore it. I should have paid more attention, because that first night, I was no longer alone. Stay with me until the end, because what you'll discover from here on out might make you think twice about sleeping in any roadside motel, especially if they give you a receipt with more than just the price. You know when your instinct screams, but you ignore it. I should have paid more attention, because that first night I was no longer alone. The noise started around 3 in the morning. It wasn't loud. In fact, it was almost too soft to be noticed, as if that was precisely why it wanted to attract attention. A dragging sound, like fingernails sliding lightly over glass. There was no wind outside. The rain had stopped hours before, and yet I heard it. I huddled in bed, covering half my face with the blanket, like a child afraid of the dark. I, a 38-year-old man, tried to pretend that whatever was outside wasn't there for me, but the feeling was that it already knew my name before I even entered that room. And between us, let me open a quick parenthesis. If you've ever been through a similar situation, or if any part of it gave you that inexplicable chill, let me know in the comments. Seriously, because this channel is built like this, story by story, person by person. Each story you share below helps piece together a larger puzzle, and I read everything. Sometimes it's a detail you share that sparks the next plot. By the way, if you're feeling something while listening to this, a discomfort, a strange curiosity, a desire to keep going, even with that chill down your spine, then leave a like now, because that's what helps this kind of content reach more people, and you can be sure there are plenty of people out there looking for stories like this to feel less alone too. And if you want to follow me on future stories, just subscribe to the channel. It's not just about horror, it's about connection, about not ignoring what most people pretend they didn't see, about places that insist on appearing to those who no longer believe in coincidences. That morning, lying in a bed that seemed to sink deeper and deeper, I still didn't know what awaited me on the second night. But something, deep down, already understood. The window was not just a window, and the warning on the paper wasn't just a warning. That sentence kept ringing in my head as if it had been whispered directly into my ear. You have 2 nights. Don't look out the window. It wasn't just what was written. It was the way it was written. The shaky handwriting. The blue of the pen. Already a bit off, as if the ink had dried mid-try. It didn't seem casual, much less a bad joke. It seemed urgent, almost desperate. I tried to rationalize it. It must have been some local superstition, an old note a guest left that ended up in the wrong drawer. But deep down, even as I tried to justify it, I could already feel the weight of it. A premonition, as if I'd just crossed an invisible line. Room number 8 was on the side of the main building, right next to the wooden fence that separated the lot from what appeared to be dry scrubland. There were no other cars in the parking lot besides my own. The doorknob was cold. As I pushed open the door, I felt the musty, stuffy air hit me immediately, as if the room hadn't been seen in a long time. The walls were a greenish beige, the carpet had stains I chose not to investigate, and the bed looked hastily made. But what caught my attention most was the window. It sat to the left of the bed, covered by a thick, ill-fitting, dark, wooden blind. Outside it hung an unusual metal latch, as if designed not just to prevent opening, but to contain something. I sat on the edge of the bed, the receipt still in my hand. I ran my fingers over the paper. It had creases in other places, as if it had been read, reread, and maybe rewritten. Part of me wanted to tear it up and forget, but the other part, the one that was more awake than ever, knew something about that message wasn't random. It was personal. It was for me. I decided to take a hot shower, wash away the tension, pretend this was just another ordinary night in a motel. But not even the shower could wash away that feeling. The water was lukewarm, smelling of rust. The fogged-up mirror revealed only outlines, but for a moment, I swear to God, I thought I saw a figure behind me. When I looked again, there was nothing. I returned to the room wrapped in a towel and for the first time looked closely at the window. I didn't open it, but I got close enough to notice scratches in the wood, from the inside out, small but numerous, all concentrated around the edges of the blind, as if someone or something had tried to pry it open with nails or claws and failed. At that moment, the sound of the reception clock came to mind. Its ticking so marked. I remembered the attendant, the way he hadn't even looked me in the eye. Everything there seemed rehearsed, as if I were reliving a scene that had been played 1,000 times before, and each guest simply repeated the previous role. I sat on the bed with my phone in hand, but there was no signal, no Wi-Fi. I turned on the GPS, and all that appeared was a blue dot, lost in the middle of the map, with no location identified. As if I were off the beaten path, as if the motel were a crack in the common space. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to relax, but the sound returned, faint but present, something dragging itself outside the window, as if waiting for me to break the rule. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what seemed like just a strange night began to take on the contours of something much bigger, a kind of hidden truth, as if this place weren't just a motel forgotten by modernity, but rather a kind of crossroads, a point where wrong decisions have real consequences, where looking out the window isn't just a gesture, but an invitation. And if you're feeling anything like this so far, that feeling that you've been somewhere like this before, or that you recognize this kind of energy, comment, "That resonates with me." Because sometimes, when we share what we feel, we discover that we're not the only ones experiencing this kind of journey. The first night at Red Pine began with a silence so profound it was unsettling. It wasn't the usual early morning silence, the kind that lulls you to sleep and soothes your body. It was a kind of absence that made noise, a heavy, dense silence, as if time inside had deliberately slowed down. I lay down with my body tired, but my mind completely alert. The window remained locked. The light from the lamp on the nightstand wavered slightly, even without a breeze. Everything seemed suspended. The analog clock I had brought in my backpack read 3:17 when I heard the sound. It wasn't loud or urgent. It was subtle, a light scraping against the glass, as if something were just testing the surface, like when someone runs a fingernail slowly over a fogged window just to see how far they can go. I sat, up in bed, instantly awake, silent. The sound repeated. No louder, no more intense, just present, almost too subtle to startle, but disturbing for that very reason, as if it knew I was listening and was waiting for my reaction. I remained motionless. The curtain remained closed, the blinds locked. For a moment I thought it was a tree branch, until I remembered there were no trees there, just a fence, the sparse brush, and the darkness of the desert. I took a deep breath, trying to rationalize. Maybe some nocturnal animal, maybe a coincidence, but too many coincidences were piling up in that place, and at this point in my journey, I was beginning to realize that not everything could be explained logically. I got up, taking slow steps, and walked to the window. The lamplight barely reached that corner of the room, making the room even more claustrophobic. I reached out until I touched the latch, and in that instant, the strangest sensation overcame me, as if something on the other side of the glass already knew exactly where my hand was. I pulled away again, trembling. I didn't open it. I didn't look. I just sat on the floor, leaning against the opposite wall, facing that window that seemed to watch me even though it was covered. I stayed there for hours, sleepless, trying to understand what exactly I was facing there. And most importantly, why? Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what had begun as a strange warning on a dirty piece of paper now became a kind of code, a hidden truth that I couldn't yet comprehend, but that enveloped me completely. I felt like this place knew me, that room 8 hadn't been given to me by chance, that the window wasn't just an architectural detail, it was the point of contact between two different worlds. I began to think about all the small decisions that had led me there, the rush to get off the highway, the choice of the nearest motel, the acceptance of a room without question, and I realized how life is made up of these tiny, almost imperceptible moments that change everything. That receipt, for example. How many had read those words before me? How many had resisted? How many had given in? The next morning, the sound had disappeared. Light streamed into the room through the crack in the door, and everything seemed entirely too normal, as if nothing had happened. But the window now bore a mark, a small scratch on the glass that hadn't been there before, a jagged line as if something or someone had pressed hard against the outside and then left its signature. I didn't tell anyone. Not even the clerk, who wasn't even at the front desk anymore. The place seemed even emptier. My footsteps echoed in the hallway as if the building were hollow. But something told me I was far from alone. I decided to go out, see the city, breathe in some fresh air, understand if the feeling that was with me was staying inside or coming with me. Comment below. I'm on this journey. 2. If any part of this story gave you that feeling that certain experiences don't happen by chance, and especially if you've also ever had the impression that someone or something was on the other side of the glass. The sun was weak that morning, as if it too hesitated to illuminate what had happened the night before. The light filtered through the crack in the door, falling on the stained carpet and revealing the dust suspended in the air. It was strange how, in the daylight, everything there seemed almost normal, almost, because even with the scenery trying to convince me nothing had happened, the scratch on the window pane was still there. Thin, crooked, discreet, but real. I even ran my finger over it, as if part of me still wanted to confirm I hadn't imagined it. But it wasn't until after my second coffee that I began to rationalize. Maybe it was the wind, even without any trees or branches nearby. Maybe it was some wild animal, one of those typical of the desert, that I simply don't recognize. Or who knows, a reflection of my tiredness, the accumulated exhaustion of a long and poorly planned journey. Minds have these things, don't they? Sometimes it fills the void with what scares us most. And maybe that was it. I decided to leave, stretch my legs, try to breathe some normalcy, convince myself that this was just one of those nonsensical stories we save to tell at the bar. But deep down, don't believe. I got in the car and drove to the nearest village, a tiny community a few kilometers away. There was a simple diner, the kind with worn red stools, a checkered floor, and the aroma of burnt coffee mixed with bacon. I sat at the counter and ordered eggs, toast, and coffee. I needed to feel part of some kind of ordinary routine. The waitress who served me looked about 50 years old, but with a look twice that age. When she asked me where I was staying, I blurted out, almost without thinking, Red Pine Motel. The effect was immediate. She froze in place. Her hand paused in midair with her cup, and for a second her eyes sought mine, but not out of curiosity, out of certainty. It was as if she already knew, as if, hearing that name, she'd triggered some memory she'd rather not revisit. She said nothing. She just refilled my cup of coffee and walked away, as if the mere mention of that place had contaminated the atmosphere. I remained silent, observing the few customers around. A man reading the newspaper, a silent couple, an old man, stirring sugar as if he weren't really there, all too still, too natural, as if they were playing a role, and badly. It gave me a chill, because the change in the atmosphere was subtle, yet palpable. From the moment the name Red Pine was spoken aloud, it felt like something invisible had taken over me. It was as if I'd broken a silent rule of that town. And now, even outside the motel, the weight of the place still clung to my skin. I decided not to stay long. I took the check and left the money on the table. As I left, I noticed the waitress watching me through the window, but she looked away as soon as she realized I'd noticed. I returned to the car and stood there for a few seconds, with the engine off, staring at my own reflection in the rearview mirror. It felt like something had begun, a kind of journey without an instruction manual. And deep down I knew this wasn't going to end just because it was morning. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what seemed like a simple coincidence begins to reveal itself as part of a pattern. There's something about these places, something hidden behind the scenes of reality, that doesn't appear in advertisements, that can't be explained in tourist guides. These are breaking points, places where the rules change, where common sense doesn't apply, and more than that, where the choices you make, even small ones, directly impact what happens next. My decision to return to Red Pine, to spend a second night there, wasn't made recklessly. It was out of necessity, a need I didn't yet fully understand, but one that grew like a presence within me. Part of me wanted to run away. The other part needed to understand. Comment: I'm feeling this calling too. If you've ever experienced something that seemed trivial but ended up being the beginning of an unexpected turn in your life. Returning to the Red Pine that second night was like crossing a border that no longer accepted return. The drive to the motel, though short, felt longer than the day before. The road was empty, and the night, unlike the previous one, was perfectly clear. No rain, no wind, but the clear sky only made the atmosphere more ironic, because inside, everything was dense. I wasn't just returning to a room, I was returning to a sensation, a presence. The red sign blinked erratically, as if trying to warn me of something, but it was too late to back out. I opened the door to room 8 and was greeted by the same musty smell, the same damp carpet, the same silence that already felt like part of the furniture, but this time everything carried an added weight, the kind of weight you can't explain, you can only feel. I left my backpack in the corner and sat on the edge of the bed. The receipt was still on the nightstand, exactly where I'd left it, the message intact. You have 2 nights. Don't look out the window. It felt like more than a note now. It was a line drawn between my sanity and whatever was trying to cross it. As the clock approached 3 in the morning, I was overcome by a state of alertness bordering on despair. I couldn't sleep. I didn't want to sleep. Part of me told myself that closing my eyes was the worst mistake I could make, so I lay awake, motionless, counting the minutes as if each second were a nail driven into time. At 3:17, the ringing began. 3 beats, exact, spaced out, almost ceremonial. They weren't loud, they weren't threatening, but they were intelligent. They were strikes that knew exactly what they were doing. The sound echoed cleanly, as if it had been produced inches from my face. And in that moment, I knew all of this was real. The fear wasn't immediate. It was different. It was a kind of involuntary reverence, a state in which the body instinctively bows, as if before something greater, something the mind doesn't understand, but respects. I stood paralyzed for a few seconds. I felt my breathing become shallow. Cold sweat trickled down my back, and, without even realizing it, I was already standing, approaching the window, slowly. Each step tore a little of myself away. I placed my hand on the blind. I felt the old, rough, poorly painted wood. I was about to open it, perhaps on impulse, perhaps out of sheer need to know, but before my fingers could complete the gesture, another part of me, perhaps the more instinctive, the older part, screamed silently, "No." I pulled my hand away. I stepped back. The room seemed to watch me back, as if it had held its breath along with me. The lamplight flickered again, ever so slightly, and I decided to leave, but not the motel, the room, the reach of that window. I locked the bathroom, lay down on the cold carpet, and lay there, curled up, listening to the silence recover. I woke just before dawn, my body aching, and my mind still gripped by the feeling that something had been with me that night. But what struck me most was the realization that even after everything, I was still there, and the note still said, "You have 2 nights, not 3, not 4, 2. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because something about that counting bothered me. It wasn't just a rule, it was a structure, a pattern, as if there were mathematics behind the supernatural, as if that place operated according to its own logic, one that obeys not the laws of physics or time, but the mindset of those who enter. And perhaps the greatest revelation lay precisely in this. The rules are shaped by the decisions you make, and breaking them has a price. When I left the bathroom, my eyes still burning with sleep, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. In the corner of the room, between the dresser and the wall, there was a crumpled sheet of paper. I picked it up carefully. It was another receipt, from another guest, it seemed, and on it, the same message, only with an added detail written in red. "If opened, do not leave. Comment below. This makes sense to me if you've also had the impression that certain places or moments carry hidden codes waiting to be deciphered." The crumpled sheet of paper I found behind the dresser looked ancient, not just old, but deliberately aged, as if time had been crueler to it than to the rest of the room. The edges were yellowed, the paper brittle, almost falling apart between my fingers, and at the top, in cursive, the same pattern, the same warning. "You have 2 nights. If you look, don't leave." This time written in a red pen, shaky, almost scratched with anger or fear. A chill ran down the back of my neck. I knelt and carefully pushed the dresser aside, making room between the wall and the cabinet. Behind it, shielded by dust and fine cobwebs, were more. A dozen folded receipts, some in envelopes, some loose, some nearly illegible, but they all said the same thing, with slight variations. One said, "Don't open your eyes at 3:17 a.m. Another, If you hear knocking, don't answer. A third, even more disturbing. If this is your third night, pretend to be asleep. That wall, that corner of the room, seemed to be the archive of a dark logic that had been repeating itself within. A kind of cycle, a script, as if different people had lived through similar experiences, with small changes, but all orbiting the same axis. 2 nights, 1 window, 1 choice. I sat on the floor, surrounded by papers, trying to understand what it meant. It was too much of a coincidence. Different people, different times, the same warning. And the same flaw. Everyone seemed to believe they could beat the rule. Everyone left a trail. And now it was my turn to decide what to do with it. I spent the next few hours studying each note, every line, every detail. Some of the handwriting was shaky, others firm. One looked like a child's. 2 or 3 of them had dates, and I realized, with a sinking feeling in my stomach, that some were over 20 years old. Others were recent. One, in particular, had the current year on it, with a name, written underneath L. Cassidy. I tried searching on my phone, of course, but Red Pine remained a black hole on the map. Nothing would load, nothing would connect. There, in that suffocating silence, amidst crumpled receipts and unanswered questions, one thing became clear to me. Room 8 was more than a room. It was a meeting place, a ritual. Something or someone was keeping it functioning with precision, as if each guest were a cog in a larger mechanism, a cycle that fed on repetition, fear, and wrong choices. The transformation this wrought in me was silent but profound. I stopped searching for a logical explanation. I stopped convincing myself it was all a delusion caused by exhaustion. I began to see the room as the scene of a never-ending crime, as a backdrop to something that shouldn't exist but did, and now it was part of my journey. I returned to the reception that afternoon, just to test, to see if I could find the attendant, but as before, there was no one. The bell on the counter remained there untouched. Behind the counter, a half-open door revealed a staircase leading down, and though curiosity called me, I didn't go. Not yet. There was something in the air, a weight that made me realize I was being watched, but not in the traditional way. It was as if the entire motel was breathing around me, as if the building were conscious. Returning to my room, I took the receipts with me and put them all in my backpack. I felt the need to get them out of there, as if they were evidence, as if they contained a message no one had time to decipher. But deep down, I knew. Taking them with me was more than an investigative gesture. It was a pact, and pacts have an impact. They transform who you are. They alter your perception. They make you see hidden truths that the real world would never allow. That night I tried to prepare myself mentally. I meditated. I prayed. I wrote. But nothing could erase the certainty that the cycle was nearing its end. The third dawn would be my last, or perhaps the beginning of something else. And of all the choices I had made up until that point, perhaps the most important was about to emerge, to look or not to look. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what's at stake here isn't just fear. It's what we do with it. It's how we react when faced with the impossible. There's a fine line between surviving something like this and becoming part of it. And at that point, I no longer knew which side I was on. The hidden truth of Red Pine wasn't just about knocks or windows. It was about repetition, about the mindset of those who enter and the transformation of those who can't leave the same. Write in the comments. Something is repeating here if you also feel that certain experiences return, change form, but carry the same energy, as if they were part of a cycle waiting to be broken. The afternoon was barely over, and it was already as if night had been deliberately brought forward. The sky grew heavy. Again, but this time with no sign of rain, just a thick layer of motionless clouds, motionless as a low ceiling about to collapse. I tried to distract my mind with any mundane task. I paced around the room, made the bed, folded clothes that weren't even wrinkled. But inside, something was fragmenting. The wealth of information I'd uncovered, the receipts, the messages, the patterns, all of it began to morph into something else. They weren't just clues anymore. They were traps, loose pieces of a story that was never told from the beginning, but always ended at the same point, the third night, and I was stepping into it. The tension turned to despair, even as I tried to keep my mind centered. I decided to leave, to stall for time, to breathe real air, to see if the world still existed outside. I grabbed my car keys and walked out the front door. Red Pine seemed even quieter than before. The sign wasn't blinking. The windows in the other rooms were all closed. No sound, no sign of life. As if the place had been frozen in time. When I got to the car, I pressed the alarm button. Nothing. I tried to open it with the key. I succeeded. I got in, took a deep breath, and turned the ignition. Silence. I tried again. Once more. The dashboard wouldn't light up. No battery. It was as if the car was dead. I closed my eyes, leaning against the steering wheel, trying to understand when things stopped making sense. But the truth is, things never made sense back then. It just took me a while to accept it. I got out of the car and, for the first time, considered abandoning everything, walking away. The nearest town wasn't that far, maybe a few hours' walk, maybe less if I stayed focused. I grabbed my backpack, instinctively locked the room, and started walking toward the property's exit. That's when I saw the fog. She wasn't there before. It was thick, white, almost silver, and it covered the entire edge of the parking lot like a living, pulsating wall, constantly moving but never advancing, as if it delimited the permitted area, an invisible circle that I now recognized. It wasn't the motel that was in the world. It was the world that had disappeared around the motel. I approached the mist slowly. I reached out, cold, dense. It was like stepping into water but without the humidity. I took a step, two. On the third, I began to hear a high-pitched buzzing inside my head, as if something was forcing my mind back. I took the fourth step, and my vision began to blur. My body felt heavy. A sudden nausea overcame me. It was like crossing a barrier that shouldn't be crossed. I staggered back, knelt on the dry earth, and coughed hard. When I looked up, the mist was still there, motionless, as if saying wordlessly, "There is no way out." I returned to my room without a word, without thinking, because it no longer mattered. What surrounded me wasn't geographic, it was psychological. It was a prison built on misinterpreted decisions, and now I was both the prisoner and the key. I lay in bed, clothes and all, staring at the stained ceiling, trying to decipher what else awaited me. The clock still ticked slowly. I knew what was coming. 3:17 a.m., the appointed moment. The question was no longer if it would happen, it was how. And if this time I would have the strength to resist, or if the temptation to look would be greater than any rule. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there comes a moment in any journey where fear becomes choice, where the hidden truth of extreme situations lies not in the phenomena themselves, but in how we respond to them. And Red Pine, I now understood, wasn't just a physical place. It was a mirror. It reflected every decision, every mental gap, every exposed weakness. And there, on the eve of the third night, the psychological game was just beginning. Write down, "I also tried to escape." If you've ever felt trapped in something invisible but extremely real, and had to choose between fighting or simply accepting it. The third night arrived as if already knowing it had won. There was no resistance from time, no effort to disguise the tension. The bedroom clock ticked away with cruel precision. Each hand seemed to carry the weight of an inevitable sentence. The feeling wasn't one of ordinary fear, it was exhaustion, a kind of tiredness that can't be cured by sleep, a profound weariness, as if my body and mind were drifting apart. I stayed in my room all day, with my backpack closed, my receipts tucked away and the door locked, but none of that protected me. Protection no longer came from the physical, it came from a decision I needed to uphold, and I knew the final line of that implicit contract was about to be tested. The window seemed to breathe. It was as if the glass pulsed with its own frequency, imperceptible to the eye, but clear to the field of perception. And as the night wore on, I began to notice other things too. The lamplight now flickered even when it was off. The sound of the clock seemed to speed up for a few seconds and then return to normal. A thin hum, the same one I'd felt when I'd touched the fog, now filled the entire room, as if the air were tainted by some silent, intelligent presence. I lay down without any intention of sleeping. My body trembled even at rest. The sheets were cold, the mattress felt harder than it had on other days, and the window on the left was a living presence. I felt its attention, as if it were waiting for my movement, my choice. And at 3:17 a.m., like a promise fulfilled, the knocking came. This time not soft ones, not testing, but demanding. 3 taps, strong, precise, with the weight of an entity that knows its time has come. I sat bolt upright. My heart was racing, my palms sweaty, my entire body on high alert, my eyes fixed on the wood of the blinds, waiting for the next sound. It came. Not a knock, but a scratch, as if something were using overlong nails to try to get in. The sound was high-pitched, continuous, as if someone were slowly drawing a straight line with the tip of a blade. I walked to the window in short steps, mesmerized. Adrenaline overcame my fear. It was as if I were in a trance, as if everything I'd resisted in the previous days was now condensed into a single moment. The rule echoed in my mind, repeated in dozens of receipts. Don't look, but what do you do when the rule becomes impossible to keep? I placed my hand on the latch, and before I opened it, part of me whispered, if you look, something changes. But it was too late. My mind had already given in. I turned the latch with my fingertips and pulled one of the blind's slats open, just enough to create a crack. The darkness outside seemed solid, the kind of darkness that reflects nothing. For a second, I saw nothing, just the silhouette of the courtyard, the still faded outline of the Red Pine sign, and the motionless shape of the parked car. But then, in the corner of my vision, something moved. I slowly turned my eyes to the left and saw myself, standing in the same spot I was, but outside, dressed exactly like me, same haircut, same look, but there was something wrong. The skin was paler, the face more angular, the eyes empty, not from the absence of pupils, but from the absence of soul. And the smile, it was a smile that didn't belong to a human being, a calculated, static, almost sculpted smile, a warning. I stood there, paralyzed, staring at that version of myself that didn't blink, that didn't move, that simply watched, as if already knowing what was coming next. The feeling was of being before something that wasn't a copy, nor a reflection, but a possibility, a displaced version, shaped by decisions I might yet make. The image began to approach, slowly, as if it didn't need to run, as if each step was meticulously timed. I backed away. I tripped over my own luggage. I fell backward, still gasping for breath. When I stood up, the window was already locked again, but the smile was still there. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what happened in that window wasn't just a rule breaking. It was a revelation, an exposure of what we normally hide from ourselves. That distorted reflection, that pale version, wasn't just an external figure. It was an idea, a symbol, the result of every denied choice, every ignored fear, every hidden truth we've allowed to fester within us. And when those parts take shape, they watch. They wait. Comment. I also saw my other side. If you have ever felt even for a moment that there was something inside you looking at you from the outside. The moment between the scream and waking was like falling from a building without ever hitting the ground. A timeless void. No image, no sound, just the sensation that something had been ripped from me. When I opened my eyes, I didn't know if I had fallen asleep, passed out, or simply been suspended somewhere between what is and what ceases to be. The only certainty I had was that something had changed, radically. The room was clean, impeccable, as if nothing had happened. No sign of dust, none of the receipts I'd hidden under the bed, not the backpack, not my clothes. The marks on the window pane were gone. The blinds now looked new, with fresh varnish, no cracks, no rust on the latch. The carpet smelled of lavender, and the lampshade cast a soft, warm, almost welcoming light. It was as if I had been erased or replaced. I stood up, slowly. My body didn't hurt, but I felt strange, too light, too silent, as if the sound of my own heart had been tuned to a different frequency. I went to the bathroom mirror, the same one that had previously reflected blurs and shadows, and stared at my face. And that's when I realized. The expression was mine, yes, but the look wasn't quite the same. It had a different shine, a focus, an absence. It was hard to explain, but it felt as if I'd been rebooted, returned to the world with the same shell, but something essential missing inside. The doorknob turned easily. I opened it slowly, expecting to find the same quiet hallway. But what I saw was a man, young, maybe in his early 30s, holding a suitcase, reading the door number. He looked up, saw me, and smiled apologetically. He said this was room 8, right? That he'd just checked in. He showed me the receipt. I made room for him without saying a word, because I knew the cycle was repeating itself. The Red Pine restarted. Papers shuffled, and the room's function, whatever it was, remained active. The guest entered naturally. He closed the door, and the hallway once again was empty. I walked through the motel as if I were floating. The receptionist now had a different employee, young. She wore a clean uniform, her hair tied back, and a friendly smile. She greeted me as if I were just another customer, and maybe I was. I tried to ask questions, but she answered with generic phrases, as if she'd just started there, as if she'd never heard of disappearances, handwritten messages, or forbidden windows. I tried to leave the motel grounds on foot. The fog had lifted, the road was visible, cars passed in the distance as if nothing had happened. I returned to my car, and this time the door opened. The battery worked. The radio turned on with some music playing on a local station. Everything normal, abnormally normal. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what I experienced there can't be explained simply as a nightmare. It wasn't an outburst. It wasn't an illusion. It was an orchestrated sequence of events that follow their own logic, one that doesn't fit reality as we know it. It's as if there were backstage areas in the world where certain experiences repeat themselves in closed cycles with different protagonists and similar outcomes. And these experiences don't follow human rules. They follow rules of impact, of transformation. They test not only your courage, but your ability to return to who you were afterward. With each rearranged detail in that room, with each object erased, I understood that it was no longer just a matter of surviving. It was a matter of reintegrating what was left of me into a life that perhaps no longer belonged to me. It was like trying to fit a misshapen piece back into the original puzzle. It seems to fit, but something about the fit betrays the difference. I got back on the road, the sound of the engine filling the silence. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, as if expecting to see something coming up behind me. There was nothing, but what was chasing me now had no form. It was an idea, an impression, the constant feeling that I was still inside Red Pine, or that Red Pine was now inside me. Write down, I was also replaced. If you ever felt like you came back from a place, but never came back whole. Time passed in a strange way after I left Red Pine. It was as if the days had lost their texture, as if each hour were covered by a thin veil that prevented me from feeling things clearly. The routine seemed the same, but there was a background noise, constant, subtle, present, that wouldn't let me forget. It wasn't the kind of noise you hear with your ears. It was an emotional frequency, as if some part of me was still there, swirling inside that room. I continued on my way. I changed my route. I avoided returning on smaller roads. I stopped only at large motels with smiling receptionists and the sound of traffic in the background. But none of this could dispel the feeling. Deep down, I knew I wasn't alone, that others had been through this, or something similar, and returned with the same invisible fracture. It wasn't until weeks later, in a desperate attempt to understand what had happened to me, that I typed the motel's name into Google, Red Pine Motel, Route 93. The first thing that came up was an old post on a supernatural stories forum. No images, no links, just text, a generic username, and a notice at the top of the page. This thread has been closed due to inactivity. But the content was almost a transcription of my own experience. Another guest, another window, same time, same sequence of knocks. And, at the end, the same sentence, I saw myself smiling outside. That discovery didn't bring relief. It brought discomfort, because it became clear that what happened to me wasn't an isolated accident. It was part of a pattern, a structure that repeats itself silently behind reality. A flaw in the system that no one fixes, perhaps because they don't know how, perhaps because they don't want to. From there, I began piecing together fragments. I took notes, tried to trace dates, locations, patterns of disappearances, but there was a problem. Everything related to Red Pine was inconsistent. Addresses changed in public records. The motel's name didn't appear on booking sites. No business records, no real photos. The only sign the place existed was my memory, and a few scattered accounts like distant echoes. One detail caught my attention. Weeks after I left, someone found an abandoned car on the side of the road, a model identical to mine. The local news ran a quick note. Driver missing in White Hills area. Police investigating. There was no mention of the motel, no mention of windows, nor of the name Jason. The strangest thing was that I still had my car. It was with me, working normally. But there it was, printed in the article, an identical vehicle with a similar license plate registered in my name. And no one could explain it. I contacted the police station responsible for the incident. I spoke to a bored-sounding attendant. I said I might be able to help with the investigation. She responded curtly, almost automatically. She informed me the case had already been closed. These things happen around here sometimes, she said. People who show up and then disappear. Before I could insist, she added, in a tone that left no room for doubt, "You don't want to get involved with this. Leave it as it is." That sentence pierced me. It wasn't a threat, it was a warning. The kind of sentence you only say when you've seen more than you should, when you've chosen survival over understanding. But I had already crossed that line. I returned to the diner I'd stopped at the first morning. The same waitress, the same atmosphere. I walked in and ordered a coffee. She recognized me immediately. She didn't smile. She didn't ask how I was. She simply came over, poured my cup and said quietly, "You left, didn't you?" I was silent. She continued, "The others don't usually leave. Not all of them, anyway. But you left. Or something left with you." That hit me like an invisible punch. Because she was right, I left. But under what conditions? In what version? Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because there's a point in every journey where facts are no longer enough, where emotional impact begins to overwhelm evidence, where the hidden truth no longer lies in documents, records, or testimonies, but in the voids, in the silences, in the spaces between things. That's where true meaning hides, behind the scenes of logic, in the decisions we don't know we've made, in the places where time bends and people cease to be whole. Comment, I was also forgotten. If you've ever felt like some part of your story just disappeared, as if no one remembered anymore, but you still carried it all. Sometimes I wonder if Red Pine was ever really a place. Not in the physical sense, but in the shared reality sense. Because since I left there, every attempt to find it again has been met with a digital haze. The address still appears on some old maps, a timid coordinate on the edge of Route 93, almost between the edge of the desert and the threshold of a forgotten territory. But that's it. On Google Street View, there's no image, no car in front, no facade, just an empty road. And when you drag the little yellow stick figure there, it simply skips the point, as if the system refuses to show it. It's as if the motel only exists for those who need to find it and ceases to exist for everyone else. This started to resonate with me on a deeper level than I expected, because it's no longer a haunting memory or an experience I can't explain. It's the idea that some places only exist for those who have been touched by them, and once you enter, part of you can never fully leave. In buried internet forums, and I'm not talking about popular sites, but about nearly extinct corners, spaces that seem to have been built by hands that have already forgotten they live, there are similar records. Fragmented posts, stories with disturbingly similar patterns. People talk about 2 nights, taps on the window, false reflexes, handwritten notices. They all describe places that don't appear in any system, places that technically don't exist, but they were lived, felt, survived. And when you try to talk about this with anyone, still living under the cloak of normalcy, you realize the chasm that opens up. No one understands. No one wants to understand, because admitting that Red Pine is real is admitting that there are spaces between things, cracks in the surface of reality, behind-the-scenes experiences that don't fit within the comfort of logic. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the question isn't whether Red Pine exists. The question is why it appears only to some, why it appears in the path of specific people, at specific moments. What's in the mental frequency of those who cross paths with it? Is it destiny? Is it an unconscious choice? Or is it a kind of test? I've been thinking about it like someone trying to remember a name that's on the tip of their tongue but slips away whenever their attention wavers. An intuition, a sense that everything was part of something larger, a hidden architecture where fear is just the surface of something deeper. Transformation. Because what happens? There isn't just supernatural, it's personal. Red Pine isn't a place where things appear, it's a place where they reveal themselves, where you encounter what you avoid within yourself, where the window is just a malicious mirror and the reflection a warning. I read a comment on one of these forums that made me pause for a few minutes in absolute silence. An anonymous user wrote, in spaced letters, as if whispering while typing, "They're not ghosts, they're versions, and when they look at you, they're deciding which one stays." That made me think about everything that happened that third night, the face I saw outside, the smile I swore I'd never forget. That wasn't a spirit. It wasn't a hallucination. It was a version of me that didn't return, or worse, that stayed put. Because ever since I left there, it doesn't feel like I survived. It's like I was allowed to continue. What if that's it? What if everything is a filter, a selective sieve, where few notice and even fewer can remember? Clearly, maybe most pass through places like Red Pine and simply forget. Maybe forgetting is part of the deal. But there are those, the few, who carry the memory, who can't let go, who continue to feel, people like me, and maybe people like you. Write in the comments, "I also saw the place that shouldn't exist," if any part of your life made you doubt reality, not because you went crazy, but because you finally saw something that logic can't erase. I stumbled upon the post by chance. It was late at night, as it often is in these situations where chance seems more planned than random. It was on an old, obscure forum, hidden behind layers of inactive pages and broken links. The thread had no catchy title, no images, just a block of text, formatted rudimentarily, as if someone had written it in a hurry or out of fear of interruption. The author's name was anonymous. There was no date, no comments, no likes. But there was something about the structure, something familiar. I started, reading without much expectation, thinking it would be just another fabricated account, the kind the internet collects with pleasure. But line after line, the text stuck with me. Words like window, knocks, receipt, 2 nights. They were all there, only written in a different voice. A voice that seemed to come from the other side. Not the other side of the world, but the other side of experience. The author described everything with a precision that disarmed me. He spoke of the silent reception, the attendant who never made eye contact, the creaking floor in room 8, the light that flickered even when turned off. He mentioned the sound of fear breathing, the exact times of the manifestations, and the warning that came non-verbally, as if the entire place were constantly whispering, "Beware of the choice you don't yet know you're about to make." The part that struck me the most was when he wrote, "The third night doesn't come to scare you. It comes to test you. It comes to see if you've learned to respect what you don't understand." That echoed in my head like a muffled bell. It was exactly what I'd felt since I left. This sense of having undergone a silent trial, where the question wasn't whether I would survive, but whether I would understand what had happened to me. But it was the end of the text that sent chills down my spine. It was short, just a loose line, like a confession hurriedly thrown out. I broke the rule, and now I belong. I stared at that sentence for minutes. I didn't know if I was reading what I'd already written in my head, and I didn't have the courage to admit it. Because the truth is, since the third night, I've never felt whole again. The feeling of being watched hasn't disappeared. It's just become more sophisticated, less direct. Now it's camouflaged in automatic gestures, in the voices around me, in reflexes that for a moment seem slightly off. And when I saw that last sentence in the story, everything clicked uncomfortably. Maybe Red Pine doesn't need you to be physically imprisoned to make you part of it. Maybe prison isn't the place. Maybe it's the emotional bond it creates with those who break the rules. The pact that activates when you cross the line between what you've been warned about and what you choose to see for yourself. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the question I've carried ever since isn't, what did I see there? Or what would have happened if I hadn't opened the window? The real question is, what if I never really left? What if everything I've experienced since then is just a molded version of my escape, a simulation fed to my mind, so I think I'm back to normal life, while in reality, I'm still trapped? This kind of revelation doesn't come with clarity. It creeps in slowly. It starts as discomfort, then settles into certainty. And when you finally understand, you realize that the motel's biggest trick isn't hiding its existence from the world. It's making you doubt your own. Comment below. I broke the rule too. If any part of this resonated with something you experienced, heard, or felt, even if you've never been able to say it out loud. If there's one thing I learned after that experience, it's that not every road leads exactly where it seems. Some curves hide more than just landscapes. They open portals, silent, subtle ones, to realities that coexist with our own, but follow different rules. And perhaps most frighteningly, these rules are never clearly announced. They come like a crumpled note, a handwritten warning, a locked window you feel the urge to open, even without knowing why. I've been there, and I've come out of it, or at least that's what the rational part of me still tries to believe. But there are days when I wake up in the middle of the night with the feeling that the room I'm in is just another version, a scenario, as if Red Pine weren't a fixed point on the map, but an idea, a presence, a state of consciousness that, once accessed, never completely leaves you. You can go on living. You can work, pay bills, love people, smile for photos, but deep down, you know you carry a mark, a kind of knowledge that can't be unlearned, because you've seen the other side. You've felt it watching, and maybe you've smiled back without realizing it. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there's a fine line between survival and replacement, between having been through something and becoming part of it. The human mind is a master at constructing acceptable versions of reality so we can continue functioning. But what if these versions are just temporary scenarios? Realities borrowed from those who broke rules that should never have been tested. The last thing I read on that forum, before the page went down, was a recent comment, anonymous, no date. It just said, "If you've read this far, congratulations. it means you're still outside. I stared at that sentence for a while, in silence, breathing heavily, and I confess that for a moment I doubted, because the outside doesn't seem so different from the inside anymore, because the rules have changed, or perhaps they've been revealed as they always were. And if you're ever driving along the Arizona highways, tired, lonely, looking for a place to rest, and you come across a red neon sign flashing Red Pine Motel, vacancy, maybe the best choice is to keep driving. But if you decide to stop, follow the rules. Always. Comment, "I'm on this." Journey 2, if you've ever felt, even without knowing how to explain it, that there are places that appear for specific people, and that after that, nothing goes back to being the same. If you've made it this far, thank you for walking this road with me. I know it's not easy to hear certain stories, especially those that make us rethink what's real and what might just be waiting to be noticed. But perhaps that's precisely what connects us, the fact that we don't ignore the signs. If this content resonated with you on some level, please leave a like, not because the video deserves it, but because this small action shows that there are people like you and me paying attention to what's behind things. And if you want to continue exploring these gaps between the real and the impossible, subscribe to the channel. Here, each new video is another path to travel, with new stories, new hidden truths, and perhaps more mirrors than windows. Oh, and tell me in the comments if you made it all the way. Right, I'm with you until the end, just so I know you felt this journey as much as I did. There's a new video waiting for you. Click on the side and continue with me on this journey, because some stories don't end, they just change form.